Taxi drivers of Reddit, what incident still sticks with you today? Hold on, guys, this is a long one. I do the overnight shift, 11 p.m., 6 a.m., in a wheelchair-accessible maxi taxi. A couple of weeks ago, I got a job at about 11:30 to pick up a guy from the police station. Not an uncommon request. Sometimes it's people who have been in the drunk tank. Other times they were reporting something. Usually they've just chosen to get picked up from the police station because they figure it's a safe place to wait. Dude has half a dozen towels and a few other miscellaneous items in a box and a shopping cart full of alcohol. After putting the towels in the front, he decides that the optimal way to get his alcohol into the van isn't to take out the cartons one by one. It's to try to pick up the entire shopping cart. I pretty quickly realize that this isn't going to happen and that he isn't going to ever be able to get this done, so I offer to put the cart onto the wheelchair lift for him. All the time we are doing this, he is telling me that he promises that he'll bring the cart back to the store the next day. Once the cart full of alcohol is in the van, we head off to his father's place while he tells me why he was at the police station, starting with the claim that the cops would never have caught him if he hadn't turned himself in. The TLDR of his story is that he got back to his father's place late the night before, having been caught in the rain, went inside, took of his clothes, and grabbed a towel. Apparently his dad came out and started accusing him of stealing the towel and kicked him out. It probably took about 15 min for him to get the story out because he couldn't keep on a single train of thought for more than 20 seconds. Eventually he got to the part where he told me what we were doing there. He'd bought the towels to replace the one that he'd stolen the night before, but before he could do that, it was vitally important to him that he demonstrated to me how he'd been taught to fold towels in the Air Force, so he spends the next 10 minutes or so carefully unfolding and refolding towels until he's gotten them right, and he can go inside to replace the towels. Of course, he isn't welcome in his dad's house, so after he gets back out, he asks me to help him find a hotel to stay in. Keep in mind that it's been about 45 minutes since he first got in the cab, so it's now after midnight. Another 15 minutes. I managed to find him a hotel that claims to have a vacancy. He rings the after-hours number and gets himself a booking for the night, pays up. I get his alcohol cart out of the van using the wheelchair lift and send him on his way. As I'm getting back in my car, he tells me that he wants to give me a $50 tip, but doesn't have any cash. So if I come back in an hour and take him to the bank, he'll get money out of the ATM and give me a tip. In between jobs, I pass back the hotel a few times to see if he's outside, but he never is. So I figure he's probably passed out in his room or something and forget about him until about 3 a.m. I get a job to that hotel. Yep, it's him. He wants to go to the bank to get money out, and as promised, he gives me a $50. We're not yet. Next, he wants to go to the only 24/7 servo in town to get cigarettes and a bottle of Coke. Really common request. The amount of fares that I get that are people needing smokes at somewhere between 2 and 4 a.m. is a little bit disturbing. On the way there, he decides that he needs to give me a Coke. So when we get there, he asks to buy 2 Cokes, but spends about 5 minutes thinking about what size Cokes he wants to buy, and eventually decides that 600 ml 21 O's bottles are a rip-off, and that 25L 44 O's are better value. He also realizes that they are doing a special on 2 Cokes for X. I don't remember how much. He also picks up 2 cans of Red Bull, one for him and one for me. You might think we're done here, but you'd be very wrong. After handing me both of the 25L bottles of Coke and a can of Red Bull that he's bought me, he decides that we are also in desperate need of donuts, and, after another 5 or so minutes of deliberation on what kinds, he ends up buying us half a dozen donuts each, because he couldn't pick what kind he wanted, so he decided on getting one of each. At this point, he decided that I deserve another $50 tip, and that he needs to buy sunglasses. It's 3:30 a.m. Why he needs servo sunglasses right now, I don't know, but he does. As you can probably guess, he doesn't know what kind of sunglasses he wants, so he asks the attendant to grab him half a dozen different ones for him to try on. I should probably mention that this servo doesn't let people inside after midnight. All transactions go through a little hole in the window for small ones, or a drawer for larger ones, so each one of these purchases has involved the guy in the servo going out to pick up the items, put them in the drawer, and push it out to my passenger. The passenger also asks me if I want a pair of sunglasses, but I actually managed to get him to accept my refusal to take them from him on the basis that I wear glasses with transition lenses, so sunglasses are useless to me. I've tried to refuse the drinks and donuts, but he just won't take no for an answer, so I consider this one to be win for me. Eventually, he buys 3 of the pairs of glasses, and I think we're going to be on our way. I'm wrong. He also needs a lighter to go with his cigarettes. Hopefully, you've picked up a pattern here and realize that he isn't going to be satisfied with one lighter. He needs to see all his options. And I'm not talking anything fancy, just the generic, cheap, single-color BIC lighters. While he's deciding on what colors he wants, someone else pulls up to get fuel and gets dragged into a discussion with my guy about what color is best for a lighter. I don't know why he needed to know what color is best for a lighter, because he ends up buy 2 of each anyway, and giving one of them to the random bloke who just wanted fuel at 4 a.m. Yes, it's 4 a.m. now because this guy has been in the car for an hour, not counting the first time he was in the car that night. And now, we are finally done with the buying shit from the servo. At this point, I haven't had a break for 5 hours, and we are legally required to have a 15-minute break after that much time, so my car's computer is beeping at me to tell me that I need to stop working, so I tell my passenger that I need him to pick somewhere for me to drop him off so that I can take my legally mandated break, and he gets super concerned that I'm going to get into trouble because of him. It takes me a few minutes to calm him down by telling him that I'm not going to get into trouble at the moment, but that I need finish the job that I'm on, so I can tell the computer that I'm on a break. He directs me up to a house owned by a friend of his. I turn off the meter, he pays me, he tips me another $50, and I tell him that he can get his stuff out of the car while I take a break. Nah, that's not what's going to happen. He has a motorbike stored here that's out of rego, and he needs to move right now. Now, before you think that I might be assisting in a crime here, he goes up to the front door of the place we're at, wakes up his mate who lives there and talks to him for 20 minutes. 15 minutes that I'm on my break, and another 5 of me convincing him that he either needs to get his shit out of my van or get his bike into it so I can take him in it somewhere. So this is perfectly legit. We get his motorbike into the van using the wheelchair lift, and I figure that at this point I'm entitled to turn on the maxi taxi rate. Basically a 50% surcharge for jobs that require me to be in the maxi van instead of being able to be done by a sedan or station wagon, as there is no way that a normal taxi would be able to transport a goddamn motorbike. It's now approaching 5 a.m., so some of the local cafes are starting to open up to catch the early morning workers, one of which doubles up as a car wash, and it turns out my passenger kind of knows the owner, so he wants to go down there. At the cafe car wash, we sit there for a while so he can make up his mind what he wants to do, and so he can tell me his plan to make millions of dollars by renting out the roof of the cafe and car wash, dismantling it, and selling the metal to install solar panels where the roof used to be. Don't ask me how this is going to make him rich. That's as far as his plan went. After telling me this, which took about 15 minutes because, once again, he could not string together more than one sentence without getting lost and restarting, he decided that what he really needed to do right now was help the owner clean out the car wash bays. So he takes some of his money, goes inside the cafe to get the owner to change it to coins for him so that he can pay the coin-operated hoses to clean out the car wash. His bike is still in the back of my van, and I've still got the meter running at this point, and he decides that the van needs a wash. He gets me to pull into one of the freshly cleaned car wash bays so he can wash my van for me. He also asks if, while he's doing this, I could go into the cafe, buy both of us a coffee, and ask the owner if he can store his bike here. I figured, fuck it. Why not? Also, I need a break from this. He gives me money for the drinks, and I grab the keys out of the taxi and go inside to talk to the owner. While ordering him a coffee and me a hot chocolate, because it's now after 5:30 a.m. say, my shift ends in less than half an hour, and I don't need the caffeine to keep me awake past my bedtime. Also, I don't like coffee. I ask if he can store his bike here for a few hours, and the owner gives permission. I also find out from the owner that the story my guy told him was that it was my first night driving and that he was training me. Go figure. After I get the drinks, I go back outside and tell the guy that my shift is ending and I need to drop him off somewhere, so he eventually decides to get his bike out of the van at exactly 6:00 a.m. Having found out from me that that's when my shift ends, I guess he decided that it was okay to keep me right up to the end of my shift, but he figures that he can get it out of the sliding side door rather than using the wheelchair lift, and in the process, nearly crashes it into the cafe owner's car. He gets the rest of his stuff out, pays me, and gives me another $50 tip. All up, he racked up around $300 in taxi fares and typed me another $200 plus 25 bottles of Coke, a can of Red Bull, half a dozen donuts, and a hot chocolate. I later found out from talking to the night shift cops that they were called in to remove him from the car wash where I left him because he wouldn't leave and was bothering customers, and that they knew that he'd been high on meth for the last 48 hours, which, honestly, explains a lot. Story 2. As a part-time Uber driver, I've encountered all sorts of passengers during my shifts. From chatty tourists to quiet commuters, each ride brings a new face and a different story. Little did I know that one particular pickup would leave an indelible mark on my heart. It was a typical day, and I had just accepted a request for a ride to a doctor's office clinic. As I navigated through the busy streets, my mind wandered, wondering about the passenger I was about to meet. Would they be friendly? Would they prefer silence? These thoughts danced in my head as I approached the building. As I pulled up to the curb, I noticed a figure standing outside the clinic. Even from a distance, I could sense that something was amiss. The woman's shoulders were slumped, and her head was bowed, as if the weight of the world rested upon her. Concern began to grow within me, and I found myself hoping that whatever troubled her, she would find solace and support. The woman spotted my car and slowly made her way towards it. As she approached, I could see the redness in her eyes and the tracks of dried tears on her cheeks. My heart sank, knowing that she must be going through something truly difficult. I put on a gentle smile, hoping to offer a small measure of comfort as she settled into the back seat. As we pulled away from the clinic, an uncomfortable silence filled the car. The woman stared out the window, lost in her thoughts, while I focused on the road ahead. The weight of her emotions was palpable, and I found myself searching for the right words to say, something to ease her pain. But in that moment, words seemed inadequate. Minutes passed, and the silence remained unbroken. I glanced at her through the rearview mirror, noticing how she fidgeted with her hands, as if trying to find an anchor in the midst of her turmoil. Just as I was about to speak, to offer a listening ear if she needed one, she took a deep breath and began to share her story. I just found out some devastating news, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm 12 weeks pregnant with twins, and I was so excited to see them today during my ultrasound. My heart skipped a beat as I processed her words. Twins! The joy and anticipation of such news filled my mind, but the sorrow in her voice told me that there was more to the story. I remained silent, allowing her the space to continue at her own pace. But the doctor, he told me that both of them, Her voice trailed off and a sob escaped her lips. They passed away. The weight of her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt a lump form in my throat, and my eyes began to sting with the threat of tears. The unimaginable pain she must be feeling, the loss of not one, but two precious lives. It was overwhelming. As I drove on, my mind raced with questions and emotions. How could I possibly offer comfort in the face of such heartbreak? What words could ease the ache of a mother's shattered dreams? I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white, as I struggled to maintain my composure. As we drove on, the woman's sobs grew quieter, but the heaviness in the air remained. I couldn't help but feel a growing concern for her well-being. The news she had received was the kind that could shatter even the strongest of spirits. I searched for the right words to say, something to offer a glimmer of comfort in the darkness of her grief. I can't even begin to imagine what you're going through, I said softly, my voice filled with sincerity. I'm so incredibly sorry for your loss. She took a shaky breath and nodded, acknowledging my condolences. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the car's engine. It's so hard to believe that this is happening. I nodded, understanding the disbelief and shock that often accompany such devastating news. It's okay to feel that way, I assured her. Take all the time you need to process this. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. Silence settled between us once more, but this time it felt less uncomfortable. It was a silence of shared empathy, a recognition of the weight of the moment. I focused on the road ahead, giving her the space to collect her thoughts and emotions. As we approached a red light, she spoke again. I was so excited when I found out I was pregnant with twins, she said, a bittersweet smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I had always dreamed of having a big family, and this felt like a double blessing. I couldn't help but smile at the thought of her joy and anticipation. That's wonderful, I said, my voice warm with understanding. I can only imagine how thrilled you must have been. She nodded, her eyes distant as she recalled those happy moments. I started making plans, thinking about how I would decorate the nursery, what names I would choose. I even bought a few onesies that said Twin A and Twin B on them. My heart ached for her, knowing that those dreams had been so cruelly shattered. It's clear how much you already loved them, I said softly, hoping to validate her feelings. I did, she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. I loved them so much, and now they're gone. As the light turned green and we continued our journey, I found myself at a loss for words once more. The depth of her pain was palpable, and I knew that no amount of platitudes could ease the ache in her heart. We rode in silence for a while longer, the only sound being the occasional sniffle from the back seat. I glanced at her through the rearview mirror, noticing how she hugged herself tightly, as if trying to hold the broken pieces of her heart together. Just as I was about to offer another word of comfort, she spoke again. I was 12 weeks along, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I was past the point of worrying about something like this happening. I nodded, understanding the sense of security that often comes with reaching certain milestones in pregnancy. It's a common belief, I said gently, but sometimes life has other plans, as painful as they may be. She sighed heavily, the weight of her grief evident in the sound. I don't know how to move forward from this. How do I say goodbye to the babies I never got to hold? Her question hung heavy in the air, a testament to the unimaginable pain she was enduring. I felt my own heart constrict, a lump forming in my throat as I searched for the right words to say. I can't even begin to fathom the depth of your loss, I said softly, my voice filled with genuine compassion. Losing a child, let alone two, it's a pain that no parent should ever have to bear. She nodded, her eyes brimming with fresh tears. I can't believe they're gone. I'll never get to hold them, to watch them grow up, to see their first smiles or hear their first laughs. As she spoke, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small, rectangular piece of paper. With trembling hands, she held it out to me. This is them, she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. I glanced at the paper, realizing that it was an ultrasound picture. Two tiny, perfect silhouettes were visible, their little bodies nestled close together. I felt a wave of emotion wash over me, a mixture of awe and profound sadness. They're beautiful, I said softly, my own eyes stinging with the threat of tears. I'm so incredibly sorry that you won't get to watch them grow and thrive. She stared at the picture, her fingers tracing the outlines of her babies. I had so many dreams for them, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the car's engine. I imagined their first steps, their first words. I even thought about what their favorite colors might be. As she spoke, I couldn't help but imagine those moments too. The joy and wonder of watching a child grow, the pride and love that comes with being a parent. It was a journey that she would never get to embark upon. I felt a profound sense of empathy for her, a deep ache in my own heart for the loss she was experiencing. No words seemed adequate to express the depth of my sorrow for her, the weight of the grief that she would carry with her forever. I know that nothing I say can take away the pain you're feeling, I said gently, my voice filled with sincerity. But please know that you're not alone in this. There are people who care, who understand, and who will be there to support you through this unimaginable journey. She nodded, her tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. Thank you, she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. I don't know how to say goodbye. How do I let go of the babies I loved so deeply? Her question struck a chord within me, a reminder of the cruel and unfair nature of life. How could anyone truly let go of a love so profound, a bond so unbreakable? Saying goodbye is never easy, I said softly, my own voice thick with emotion. But maybe it's not about letting go completely. Maybe it's about finding a way to carry their memory with you, to honor the love you have for them in whatever way feels right to you. She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine for a glimmer of hope in the darkness of her grief. How do I do that? I took a deep breath, knowing that there was no easy answer, no quick fix for the pain she was experiencing. You take it one day at a time, I said gently. You allow yourself to grieve, to feel the full spectrum of your emotions. You lean on the support of those who care about you, and you find ways to keep their memory alive in your heart. As we continued our journey, the atmosphere in the car remained somber. The weight of her loss hung heavy in the air, a palpable reminder of the fragility of life and the depths of human suffering. I found myself struggling to find the right words to offer comfort, knowing that no amount of condolences could ease the ache in her heart. I wanted to provide a glimmer of hope, a ray of light in the darkness of her grief. But I knew that healing would be a long and difficult journey. I know that the road ahead may seem daunting, I said softly, my voice filled with compassion. But please remember that you don't have to walk it alone. Reach out to your loved ones, lean on their support, and allow yourself to grieve in whatever way feels right to you. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the ultrasound picture in her hands. I have a wonderful husband and family, she said, a hint of gratitude in her voice. I know they'll be there for me, but it's still so hard to imagine moving forward without my babies. I understood her hesitation, the fear of facing a future that looked so different from the one she had envisioned. It's okay to take things one step at a time, I reassured her. Healing is a process, and it's important to be gentle with yourself along the way. As we approached her destination, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of empathy for her. I wished I could take away her pain, to offer more than just words of comfort. But I knew that her journey of grief was a deeply personal one. Thank you for sharing your story with me, I said as I pulled up to the curb. I know it couldn't have been easy, but please know that your babies will always be a part of you. Their love will live on in your heart, and their memory will be cherished forever. She looked up at me, tears glistening in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. Thank you for listening, for understanding. It means more than you know. I offered her a gentle smile, hoping to convey the depth of my sympathy and support. If you ever need someone to talk to, please don't hesitate to reach out. There are resources and support groups available, people who understand the pain you're going through. She nodded, taking a deep breath as she gathered her belongings. I will, she promised, her voice a little stronger than before. Thank you again for everything. As she stepped out of the car, I watched as she made her way towards the building. Her steps were slow, her shoulders still heavy with the weight of her grief. But there was a glimmer of determination in her eyes. I sat there for a moment, my own heart heavy with the emotions of the day. I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of admiration for her strength, for her willingness to share her story with a complete stranger. As I watched her disappear into the building, I knew that her journey was far from over. The road ahead would be filled with ups and downs, with moments of joy and sorrow. but I had a feeling that she would find her way through the darkness. With a heavy sigh, I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. The encounter had left a profound impact on me, a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the power of empathy and compassion. As I drove on to my next destination, I carried her story with me, a testament to the strength of a mother's love and the enduring nature of the human heart. Story 3. It was just another late-night shift for me, a seasoned taxi driver navigating the city streets. The clock had just struck 2 a.m. when a heavily intoxicated man stumbled into the back of my cab. As he slumped into the seat, he mumbled something that sounded like Frobisher Street. I furrowed my brow, trying to decipher his slurred speech. "Could you please repeat that?" I asked, leaning closer to the partition. He mumbled the same phrase again, his words blending together in a drunken haze. I sighed, realizing this was going to be a challenging fare. Reaching for my trusty street directory, I flipped through the pages, scanning for anything that resembled the sounds he had uttered. To my surprise, there it was, Frobisher Street. It was a little-known road on the outskirts of town, but it definitely existed. I glanced back at my passenger, who had now slumped against the window, his eyes half closed. "All right, buddy," I said, putting the car into gear. "Frobisher Street it is." As we set off into the night, I couldn't help but wonder what state he would be in by the time we reached our destination. The streets were quiet at this hour, with only the occasional flicker of street lights and the soft hum of the engine to keep us company. I tried to make small talk, hoping to keep my passenger awake and coherent. "So what brings you out this late?" I asked, glancing at him through the rearview mirror. But my words were met with only a soft groan as he shifted in his seat, his head lolling to the side. I shook my head, realizing that any attempt at conversation would be futile. The journey seemed to stretch on forever, the minutes ticking by as we wound through the empty streets. I found myself gripping the steering wheel tighter, the tension building as I anticipated the challenge of waking my passenger once we arrived. At last, the street sign for Frobisher Street came into view. I pulled over to the curb, the brakes squeaking slightly as we came to a stop. I turned to face my passenger, who was now completely unconscious, his mouth hanging open as he snored softly. "Hey, wake up!" I called out, my voice echoing in the confines of the cab. But he didn't stir. I tried again, louder this time. "We're here, Frobisher Street!" Still no response. I sighed, realizing that this was going to be more difficult than I had anticipated. I opened my door and stepped out into the cool night air, stretching my legs after the long drive. As I approached the rear door, I steeled myself for what was to come. I yanked it open, expecting my passenger to jolt awake. Instead, he simply tumbled out, landing in a heap on the grass beside the curb. I stood there for a moment, staring down at his crumpled form. The fare was only about 15 and hardly worth the trouble. For a brief instant, I contemplated leaving him there, letting him sleep off his intoxication on the cold, hard ground. But as I looked up at the star-studded sky, a twinge of conscience tugged at my heart. It was freezing out, and leaving him here could be dangerous. With a heavy sigh, I knew what I had to do. I bent down, hooked my arms under his, and hoisted him up, preparing for the arduous task of getting him to his house. Little did I know, the night was about to take an even stranger turn. With my intoxicated passenger now draped over my shoulder, I began the laborious process of walking him to his house. His feet dragged along the pavement, his weight bearing down on me with each step. I grunted, adjusting my grip as I scanned the houses, looking for any sign of which one might be his. "Hey, buddy," I said, jostling him slightly. "Which house is yours?" But my question was met with only a soft groan, his head lolling against my shoulder. I sighed, realizing that I would have to take matters into my own hands. As we stumbled along the street, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of frustration. Here I was, in the middle of the night, carrying a complete stranger to his home. It wasn't exactly what I had signed up for when I started my shift, but as I glanced down at his face, peaceful in his drunken slumber, I felt a twinge of sympathy. We've all had rough nights, and who knows what he was going through. I couldn't just leave him out here to fend for himself. At last, we reached a house that seemed as likely as any other. I propped him up against the doorframe, holding him steady with one hand while I reached for the doorbell with the other. "Please be the right house," I muttered under my breath as I pressed the button. But there was no answer. I tried again, my finger jabbing the button more forcefully this time. Still nothing. I turned back to my passenger, who was now sliding down the doorframe, his legs giving out beneath him. I quickly grabbed him, hoisting him back up. "Come on, man," I said, my voice tinged with exasperation. "Work with me here." But he simply mumbled something incoherent, his eyes fluttering open for a brief moment before closing again. I looked around, weighing my options. I could leave him here, propped up against the door. But what if it wasn't his house? What if he woke up, disoriented and confused, and wandered off into the night? I couldn't take that risk. With a heavy sigh, I made my decision. "All right, let's find your wallet," I said, patting down his pockets. "There's got to be an ID or something in there," But as I searched, my frustration only grew. His pockets were empty, save for a few crumpled receipts and a handful of change. I was just about to give up when I felt something in his back pocket. I reached in, my fingers closing around a small leather object. A wave of relief washed over me as I pulled out his wallet. I quickly flipped it open, scanning the contents for any clue as to where he lived. And there it was. A driver's license, complete with his address. Frobisher Street, number 42, I read aloud, glancing up at the house numbers. We're only a few doors down. With renewed determination, I hoisted him up once more, my arms straining under his dead weight. Step by step, we made our way down the street, the cool night air whipping around us. At last, we reached number 42. I dragged him up the steps, propping him up against the door as I reached for the doorbell. "Please be home," I whispered, my finger hovering over the button. But as I pressed down, I heard a soft click. The door swung open, revealing a darkened entryway. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should just leave him here. But the thought of him stumbling around, lost and confused, was too much to bear. With a sigh of resignation, I stepped forward, preparing to guide him inside. Little did I know the night's surprises were far from over. With my arm firmly wrapped around his waist, I half-carried, half-dragged my passenger through the doorway and into the dimly lit house. The air was stale, and the furniture looked as if it hadn't been used in months. I couldn't help but wonder what kind of life this man led. As we stumbled down the hallway, I scanned the walls for a light switch. But before I could find one, my passenger suddenly lurched forward, his knees buckling beneath him. I tightened my grip, straining to keep him upright. "Whoa there," I said, my voice echoing in the empty house. "Let's get you to the couch." With a grunt of effort, I managed to maneuver him into the living room, where I spotted a worn-looking sofa. I lowered him onto it, making sure his head was supported by a cushion. As I straightened up, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. I had gone above and beyond the call of duty, ensuring that my passenger was safe and sound. But then a thought struck me. The fare. I had been so focused on getting him inside that I had almost forgotten about the money he owed me. I cleared my throat, feeling a bit awkward. "So, about the fare," I said, rubbing the back of my neck. My passenger's eyes fluttered open, and he looked at me with a blank expression. "Huh? The fare," I repeated, a bit louder this time. "It's 15. He blinked slowly, as if trying to process my words. Then, with a groan, he pushed himself up into a sitting position. Right, he mumbled, patting his pockets. "Just gotta get it inside." I watched as he struggled to his feet, swaying slightly as he tried to regain his balance. He took a step forward, then another, before stumbling and nearly falling flat on his face. I quickly reached out, grabbing his arm to steady him. "Whoa, easy there," I said, concern creeping into my voice. "Maybe I should just come back tomorrow for the fare." But he shook his head, a determined look crossing his face. No, he slurred. "I'll get it. Just wait here." And with that, he staggered off down the hallway, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there for a moment, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. The minutes ticked by, and I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. What if he had passed out again? What if he couldn't find his wallet? I was just about to go and check on him when I heard a loud thud, followed by a groan. My heart leaped into my throat, and I rushed down the hallway, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. But as I rounded the corner, I saw my passenger sprawled on the floor, his face pressed against the hardwood. I knelt down beside him, my hands hovering uncertainly over his prone form. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He mumbled something unintelligible, his hand twitching at his side. And then, with a shaky movement, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $50 note. I stared at it, my eyes widening in surprise. I had been expecting $15, maybe $20 at most. But $50? It seemed too good to be true. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should just take the money and go. But as I looked down at my passenger, his face etched with exhaustion and intoxication, I knew I couldn't leave him like this. With a sigh, I reached out and took the note, stuffing it into my pocket. "Thanks," I said softly. "I'll make sure you get inside safely." And with that, I hooked my arms under his and began the arduous process of dragging him back to the couch, my mind reeling with the unexpected turn of events. As I held the $50 note in my hand, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. It had been a long and challenging night, and the unexpected generosity of my passenger was a welcome surprise. I tucked the note into my pocket, making a mental note to get some change from my wallet. I didn't want to take more than what was owed, despite the passenger's insistence. I turned back to him, ready to express my gratitude and bid him good night. But as I opened my mouth to speak, I felt a sudden unsettling sensation. My passenger, still sprawled on the couch, had reached out and was now fumbling with the zipper of my jeans. I froze, my mind reeling with shock and confusion. What was he doing? Had he misinterpreted my kindness for something else entirely? I quickly stepped back, pushing his hand away with a firm but gentle motion. "Whoa, buddy!" I exclaimed, my voice tinged with a mix of surprise and discomfort. "I don't swing that way." But my passenger seemed undeterred. With a clumsy movement, he reached into his pocket and pulled out another $50 note. He held it out to me, his eyes wide and pleading. "Please," he mumbled, his words slurred and barely coherent. I stared at the money, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe what was happening. Here I was, in the middle of the night, being propositioned by a drunk stranger. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. I knew I had to handle this situation delicately. I didn't want to upset or offend him, but I also needed to make it clear that his advances were not welcome. "Listen," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested. I'm just here to make sure you get home safely." But my passenger seemed not to hear me. He continued to hold out the money, his arm trembling with the effort. I sighed, realizing that I needed to be more direct. I reached out and took the note from his hand, but instead of pocketing it, I held it back out to him. "I can't accept this," I said, my voice steady and clear. "It's not right." For a moment, he looked at me with a confused expression, as if he couldn't quite comprehend what I was saying. But then, with a sudden burst of energy, he pushed himself up into a sitting position. "Please," he repeated, his voice taking on a desperate, almost plaintive tone. "I want you to have it." I hesitated, torn between my desire to do the right thing and my need to extricate myself from this uncomfortable situation. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw a depth of sadness and loneliness that I hadn't noticed before. Perhaps this was his way of reaching out, of trying to make a connection in a world that had left him behind. With a heavy sigh, I made my decision. I took the note from his hand and slipped it into my pocket, alongside the first one. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice tinged with a mix of gratitude and resignation. "I appreciate it." And with that, I turned and headed for the door, my mind reeling with the strange and unexpected turn the night had taken. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just experienced something profound and unsettling. But I also knew that in the end, I had done the right thing. With a deep breath, I climbed back into my taxi and started the engine, ready to put this bizarre encounter behind me and move on to the next fare. Story 4. It was just another night shift for me. A 22-year-old taxi driver, cruising the streets and picking up passengers from all walks of life. Little did I know that this particular evening would turn into one of the most bizarre and unforgettable experiences of my career. As I pulled into the Walmart parking lot around 8 p.m., a stunning lady in her mid-30s caught my eye. She had an air of elegance about her, and I couldn't help but wonder what had brought her to this place at such an hour. She gracefully entered my taxi, and as she settled into the back seat, I asked her where she wanted to go. "Is there any limit to how far I can ask you to drive?" she inquired, her voice soft yet filled with curiosity. "No, ma'am," I replied, trying to maintain a professional tone despite my growing intrigue. "Wherever you need to go, I'll take you there." A slight smile played on her lips as she leaned forward, her perfume filling the car with a delightful scent. "In that case, I need you to take me to my boyfriend's grandmother's house. It's in a small rural town about 70 miles from here." I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at her unusual request. It wasn't every day that I had a passenger asking to travel such a distance, especially to a place as specific as their boyfriend's grandmother's house. But as a taxi driver, I had learned to expect the unexpected. "Sure thing," I said, plugging the address into my GPS. "It's going to be a long ride, but I'll get you there safely." As we set off into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to be the easiest money I had ever made. The lady seemed content to sit back and gaze out the window, lost in her own thoughts. I found myself wondering about her story, about what had compelled her to embark on this impromptu journey. Being a taxi driver, I had encountered my fair share of interesting characters over the years. From drunken partygoers to businessmen with secrets to keep, I had seen it all. But there was something different about this lady, something that piqued my curiosity in a way that no other passenger had before. As the miles ticked by and the city lights faded into the rearview mirror, I couldn't help but steal glances at her through the mirror. She had a certain mystery about her, a depth that I longed to unravel. But I knew better than to pry, to overstep the boundaries of my role as a driver. The rural landscape stretched out before us, a patchwork of farmland and small towns that seemed frozen in time. The lady remained silent, her gaze fixed on the passing scenery. I found myself wondering what was going through her mind, what had brought her to this moment in her life. Little did I know that the long drive ahead would be filled with surprises, that the lady's true intentions would be revealed, and that this night would become a story I would never forget. As we pressed on into the darkness, the anticipation grew, and I found myself eager to see where this journey would take us. As we navigated the winding roads of the rural landscape, the lady finally broke her silence. She began to share snippets of her life, painting a picture of a complicated relationship with her boyfriend. I listened attentively, offering the occasional nod or word of encouragement, but mostly letting her unburden herself. She spoke of their ups and downs, the love they shared, and the doubts that had begun to creep in. She confessed that her boyfriend had been distant lately, spending more and more time at his grandmother's house. At first, she had believed his excuses, but as the weeks went by, suspicion had taken root in her heart. As we drew closer to our destination, I couldn't help but notice the change in her demeanor. Her hands fidgeted nervously in her lap, and her gaze darted anxiously out the window. The closer we got, the more agitated she became, as if she were steeling herself for a confrontation. "I just need to know," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "I need to see if he's really where he says he is." Realization dawned on me then. This wasn't just a random late-night drive to a rural town. This was a mission, a desperate attempt to catch her boyfriend in a lie. My heart went out to her, understanding the pain and uncertainty she must have been feeling. As we approached the grandmother's house, the lady's breath caught in her throat. She leaned forward, scanning the driveway with an intensity that was almost palpable. And then, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders, she let out a sigh of relief. "He's here," she breathed, sinking back into the seat. "His car is in the driveway, just like he said it would be." I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief myself, happy that her worst fears had not been realized. But as I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, I could see the mix of emotions playing across her face. Relief, yes, but also a hint of sadness and resignation. She began to open up more about their relationship, the challenges they had faced, and the insecurities that had plagued her. She spoke of the little things that had made her doubt his loyalty, the missed calls and unanswered texts, the secretive behavior that had set off alarm bells in her mind. I listened, offering what comfort I could, but knowing that some battles had to be fought alone. As a taxi driver, I had learned that sometimes the best thing I could do was simply be there, a non-judgmental ear in a moment of need. As we sat there in the stillness of the night, the grandmother's house looming in the distance, I couldn't help but reflect on the complexities of human relationships, the lengths we go to for love, the fears that can consume us, and the desperate measures we sometimes take to hold on to what we cherish most. Looking back, I realized that this long drive had been about more than just the miles we had covered. It had been a journey of the heart, a glimpse into the vulnerabilities and strengths that make us human. And as we prepared to embark on the return trip, I knew that this was a story I would carry with me, a reminder of the unexpected ways in which life can surprise us. As the lady settled back into her seat, I expected her to take a moment to process the revelation that her boyfriend was indeed where he said he would be. However, to my surprise, she immediately asked me to turn the car around and head back to where we had started. "You don't want to go inside, talk to him?" I asked, puzzled by her decision. She shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "No, I've seen what I needed to see. It's time to go home." As we began the long journey back, I couldn't help but marvel at the sudden shift in her mood. Gone was the anxious, worried woman from before, replaced by a more relaxed and friendly demeanor. It was as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders, and she was ready to embrace the night with a newfound sense of freedom. We chatted more easily now, the conversation flowing between us like old friends. She asked me about my life, my dreams, and my experiences as a taxi driver. I found myself opening up to her, sharing stories of the countless passengers I had encountered over the years, the laughter and the tears, the moments of connection, and the ones of solitude. As the miles ticked by, the lady insisted on making several stops along the way. At convenience stores and fast food places, she would hop out of the car, returning with snacks and drinks for us to share. She even offered to buy me anything I wanted, her generosity catching me off guard. "Please, let me treat you," she insisted, pressing a bag of chips and a soda into my hands. "It's the least I can do after dragging you all the way out here." I hesitated for a moment, not wanting to take advantage of her kindness. But there was something in her eyes, a genuine desire to show her appreciation, that made me accept her offer with a grateful smile. As the hours ticked by and the meter climbed higher and higher, I couldn't help but feel a sense of surrealism wash over me. Here I was, driving through the night with a virtual stranger, the meter reaching a staggering $450 as the clock struck 1 a.m. It was a situation I had never encountered before, and I couldn't quite wrap my head around it. But despite the unusual circumstances, I found myself enjoying the lady's company. She had a way of putting me at ease, her laughter infectious and her stories captivating. It was as if, for a brief moment in time, we had formed a connection that transcended the typical driver-passenger relationship. As we neared our final destination, I couldn't help but reflect on the extraordinary events of the night. What had started as a simple taxi ride had turned into an unforgettable experience, one that had challenged my perceptions and reminded me of the unpredictable nature of life. The lady's generosity, her willingness to treat a complete stranger with such kindness, had touched me in a way I hadn't expected. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of nights, there were still moments of light to be found, still people who could surprise us with their capacity for goodness. As we pulled up to her house, the meter reading an astronomical $450, I couldn't help but feel a sense of bittersweet satisfaction. The night had been long and the fare steep, but the memories and the lessons learned were priceless. And as the lady prepared to exit the car, I knew that this was a ride I would never forget. I couldn't help but feel a sense of curiosity mixed with apprehension. The night had been full of surprises, and I had a feeling that there might be one more in store. The lady gathered her belongings from the back seat, taking her time as she double-checked to make sure she hadn't forgotten anything. I watched as she made her way to the front door, her silhouette illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light. But just as I was about to put the car in drive and head off into the night, she turned back around and approached my window. With a mischievous glint in her eye, she leaned in and made an unexpected proposition. "Why don't you come inside?" she asked, her voice low and inviting. "You can keep the meter running, so technically you're still on the job." I felt my heart skip a beat at her words, a mix of excitement and uncertainty coursing through my veins. It was an offer that I had never encountered before, a blurring of the lines between professional and personal. For a moment, I found myself tempted by the prospect of extending our time together, of discovering what lay beyond the threshold of her front door. But as I looked into her eyes, I knew that I had to make a choice. As a taxi driver, I had always prided myself on maintaining a certain level of professionalism. I had seen the consequences of blurring those lines, the complications that could arise from getting too involved with a passenger. And as much as I was drawn to this mysterious lady, I knew that I had to put my responsibilities first. With a heavy heart, I shook my head, declining her invitation. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice filled with genuine regret. "But I can't. It wouldn't be right." To my surprise, she didn't seem disappointed by my response. Instead, she smiled softly, a look of understanding in her eyes. She reached into her purse and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, pressing it into my hand. "For your trouble," she said, her voice warm and sincere, "and for being such a wonderful companion tonight." I looked down at the bill in my hand, my eyes widening at the generous tip. It was more than I had ever received from a single passenger, a testament to the impact our journey had had on both of us. As she turned to walk away, I couldn't help but feel a pang of curiosity, a lingering what if that would stay with me long after the night had ended. What would have happened if I had accepted her invitation? What stories and secrets lay waiting behind that front door? But as I watched her disappear into the house, the meter still running, I knew that some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved, that sometimes the most meaningful connections were the ones that were fleeting, the ones that left us with a sense of wonder and possibility. As I finally turned off the meter and began the long drive back to the city, I couldn't shake the feeling that this night had been a turning point in my life. A reminder that even in the most unexpected of places, with the most unlikely of passengers, there was still magic to be found. And as the miles stretched out before me, the lady's generous tip tucked safely in my pocket, I knew that I would carry the memory of this night with me forever. A testament to the power of human connection and the endless possibilities that lay waiting in the most ordinary of moments. Story 5. I'll never forget that night during the pandemic when I was driving for Uber. It was just another shift, or so I thought. As I pulled up to the curb to pick up my next passengers, I could hear the couple arguing loudly before they even got into my car. The tension was palpable, and I knew right away that this was going to be an interesting ride. The couple, clearly drunk and coming from a family party, stumbled into my car, still bickering. As I started driving, I couldn't help but overhear their heated conversation. Apparently, someone at the party had disrespected the man, and his girlfriend had failed to stand up for him. The more they argued, the more I learned about the incident that had transpired earlier that night. "I can't believe you just sat there and let him talk to me like that," the man shouted, his voice filled with anger and frustration. "What was I supposed to do? Cause a scene in front of everyone?" The woman retorted, her words slurring slightly. As their argument continued, I tried to focus on the road ahead, but it was difficult to ignore the growing tension in the car. The couple's voices grew louder and more aggressive with each passing minute, filling the confined space with their toxic energy. I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable, trapped in the middle of their private dispute. It was like being an unwilling spectator to a dramatic play unfolding in the back seat of my own vehicle. The man's face was flushed with rage, while the woman's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Their argument revealed more details about the incident at the party. The man felt betrayed and humiliated by his girlfriend's lack of support when he needed it most. The woman, on the other hand, seemed exasperated and defensive, as if she had grown tired of her partner's constant need for validation. As I navigated the city streets, their voices continued to echo in my ears. It was a relief when I finally saw the sign for their exit on the expressway. Little did I know, the night was about to take an even more unexpected turn. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease as I approached the exit ramp. The couple's argument had reached a fever pitch, and I could sense that something was about to happen. I just hoped that whatever it was It wouldn't put me in a difficult position. But as I would soon find out, the night was far from over. The couple's toxic relationship was about to take a shocking twist, one that would leave me questioning the depths of human pettiness and vindictiveness. As an Uber driver, I thought I had seen it all, but this couple was about to prove me wrong in ways I never could have imagined. As I merged onto the expressway, the couple's argument showed no signs of slowing down. If anything, it seemed to intensify with each passing mile. The confined space of the car felt suffocating, their toxic energy permeating every inch of the vehicle. "You never have my back!" the man shouted, his voice raw with emotion. "You're supposed to be my partner, my ride or die. I'm sick and tired of your constant need for validation." The woman fired back, her words dripping with venom. "I can't keep fighting your battles for you." I tried to focus on the road ahead, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore the chaos unfolding in the back seat. The couple's screaming match was like a twisted soundtrack, their voices rising and falling in a discordant melody of anger and resentment. As their argument escalated, more details about the incident at the party came to light. Apparently, the man had gotten into a heated exchange with the woman's brother, who had made some disparaging comments about his job and financial situation. The woman had remained silent during the confrontation, which only fueled the man's sense of betrayal. "You just sat there and let him humiliate me in front of everyone," the man accused, his voice trembling with rage. "Do you have any idea how that made me feel?" "I'm not responsible for your fragile ego," the woman retorted, her words cutting like a knife. "Maybe if you had a real job and could provide for us, he wouldn't have said those things." The air in the car was thick with tension, and I could feel my own stress levels rising. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to maintain my composure as their toxicity threatened to overwhelm me. It was like being trapped in a pressure cooker, the couple's anger and resentment building to a boiling point. I couldn't help but wonder how two people who were supposed to love and support each other could treat one another with such cruelty. Their words were like weapons, designed to inflict maximum damage on each other's hearts and minds. As I approached their exit on the expressway, I silently prayed for the ride to be over soon. I didn't know how much more of their arguing I could take. The couple's toxic energy was seeping into my own psyche, leaving me feeling drained and emotionally exhausted. Little did I know, the night was about to take an even more dramatic turn. The couple's argument was about to reach a breaking point, one that would leave me stunned and questioning the very nature of human relationships. As I took the exit ramp, I braced myself for whatever lay ahead. I had a feeling that the couple's story was far from over, and that I was about to witness something truly shocking. But nothing could have prepared me for the twisted turn of events that was about to unfold. As I took the exit ramp, the man's voice suddenly cut through the arguing, catching me off guard. "Pull over!" he demanded, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Let me out at the next exit." I glanced at the couple in the rearview mirror, trying to gauge their intentions. The man's face was contorted with anger, his eyes blazing with a fierce determination. The woman, on the other hand, looked stunned, as if she couldn't quite believe what was happening. I had no choice but to comply with the man's request. As I approached the light at the end of the ramp, I slowed the car to a stop, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to expect, but I had a feeling that things were about to take a dramatic turn. The moment the car came to a halt, the man flung the door open and jumped out, his feet hitting the pavement with a resounding thud. Without so much as a backwards glance, he started walking away, his figure quickly disappearing into the night. I sat there stunned, unsure of what to do. There was nowhere for me to pull over without blocking traffic, and I couldn't just leave the woman stranded in the middle of the road. I turned to her, my eyes searching for some kind of guidance. "Just go," she said, her voice eerily calm. "He'll find his own way home." I hesitated for a moment, torn between my responsibility as a driver and my concern for the man's well-being, but the woman's words left no room for argument. She seemed resolute in her decision to leave her fiancé behind, as if she had already made peace with the consequences of her actions. As the light turned green, I slowly pulled away from the intersection, my mind reeling from the events that had just transpired. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in the pit of my stomach. It felt wrong to leave the man behind, to abandon him on a random road in the middle of the night. But the woman's nonchalance was even more unsettling. How could she be so calm, so detached, in the face of such a dramatic turn of events? It was as if she had been expecting this moment, as if she had been waiting for an opportunity to leave her fiancé in the dust. As I drove away, the man's figure grew smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror until he was nothing more than a distant memory. I couldn't help but wonder what had driven him to such a desperate act, to willingly abandon his fiancé and strike out on his own. Little did I know the night was far from over. The woman's actions were about to take an even more twisted turn, one that would leave me questioning the very nature of human relationships and the depths of vindictiveness that people were capable of. As I navigated the empty streets, the woman's presence in the back seat felt like a dark cloud, a reminder of the toxicity that had permeated the night. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just witnessed something truly disturbing, a glimpse into the darkest corners of the human heart. As I drove the remaining distance to the woman's house, a sense of unease settled over me. The events of the night had left me shaken, and I couldn't help but feel like I was trapped in the middle of a twisted drama that I wanted no part of. Suddenly, the woman's voice broke the silence, startling me out of my thoughts. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her calmly dialing a number on her phone, her expression cool and collected. "Hello, yes. I think I lost my phone with this number somewhere in my house," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "I was wondering if you could deactivate it just in case someone finds it and tries to use it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The woman was calling her cell carrier, pretending to have lost her phone with her fiancé's number. But I knew the truth. She was deliberately cutting off her fiancé's communication, leaving him stranded and isolated on that random road. As the realization of her vindictive actions sank in, I felt a wave of shock and disgust wash over me. How could someone be so cruel, so calculating, towards the person they were supposed to love and cherish? It was a level of pettiness and toxicity that I had never encountered before. My mind raced with thoughts as I tried to process the gravity of the situation. The couple's relationship was clearly broken beyond repair, a twisted web of resentment, anger, and vindictiveness. I couldn't help but wonder how they had gotten to this point. How two people who had once promised to love each other forever could end up treating each other with such callousness. As I listened to the woman's conversation with the cell carrier, I felt a growing sense of unease. She spoke with such ease, such nonchalance, as if she were simply ordering a pizza rather than destroying her fiancé's lifeline. It was a chilling reminder of the depths of human cruelty, of the way that love could turn to hate in the blink of an eye. The remaining minutes of the drive felt like an eternity, the weight of the woman's actions hanging heavy in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling of complicity, of being an unwitting accomplice to her vindictive plot. But what could I do? I was just an Uber driver, caught in the middle of a toxic drama that I had no power to stop. As I finally pulled up to the woman's house, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I couldn't wait to be rid of her, to put this twisted night behind me and move on with my life. But even as she exited the car, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in the pit of my stomach. The woman's actions had left a bitter taste in my mouth, a reminder of the ugly side of human nature. I couldn't help but wonder what kind of person could be so cruel, so vindictive, towards someone they had once loved. It was a sobering reminder of the fragility of relationships, of the way that even the strongest bonds could be shattered by pettiness and spite. As I drove away from the woman's house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just witnessed something truly disturbing. The couple's toxic relationship had left a lasting impact on me, a reminder of the darkness that could lurk beneath the surface of even the most seemingly perfect partnerships. Story 6. The fog hung heavy in the air, a thick blanket that shrouded the city in an eerie silence. It was about 4 a.m. on a Sunday morning, and I was heading back to the taxi rank after a long night shift. The streets were deserted, with only the occasional flicker of a streetlight to guide my way. As I approached the bridge, a sense of unease crept over me. The dual carriageway above was barely visible through the dense fog, and the road beneath had no pavements. It was then that I spotted a silhouette on the bridge, a lone figure standing on the wrong side of the railings. My heart skipped a beat as I realized the gravity of the situation. I pulled up at the side of the road, squinting through the fog to get a closer look. As I drew nearer, I could make out the features of a young woman, her face etched with pain and despair. Without hesitation, I reached for my phone and dialed 999. The operator's voice was calm and reassuring as I requested police and an ambulance. I knew that every second counted, and I couldn't bear the thought of leaving this young woman alone in her darkest hour. I jumped out of the taxi, my mind racing with thoughts of my own struggles with mental health. I had battled my own demons in the past, and I had seen the toll it could take on those closest to me. I couldn't let this young woman face her pain alone. As I approached her, I could see the tears streaming down her face, her body trembling in the cold night air. She looked so fragile, so lost, and my heart ached for her. I knew that I had to be her lifeline, her connection to a world that seemed so far away. "Hey there," I said softly, my voice barely audible over the sound of the wind. "I'm here to help. Can we talk for a bit?" She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. For a moment I thought she might run, but something in my voice must have reached her. She nodded, her lips quivering as she tried to speak. I took a step closer, careful not to startle her. "My name's John," I said, offering a small smile. "What's yours?" "Sarah," she whispered, her voice so faint that I had to strain to hear her. "It's nice to meet you, Sarah," I replied, my tone gentle and reassuring. "I know things must be really tough right now, but I want you to know that you're not alone. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere until help arrives." She looked at me, a flicker of hope in her eyes. It was a small victory, but it was a start. I knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but I was determined to be there for her, to listen, and to offer whatever support I could. As we stood there on that foggy bridge, the world around us faded away. It was just the two of us, Two strangers brought together by a shared pain and a desperate need for connection. I took a deep breath, ready to share my own story and to listen to hers, hoping that somehow, in the midst of this darkness, we could find a glimmer of light. As I stood there with Sarah, memories of my own struggles with mental health came flooding back. I remembered the darkness that had consumed me, the feeling of being trapped in a never-ending cycle of pain and despair. I had fought hard to overcome my demons, but the scars remained, a constant reminder of the battles I had faced. I thought of my best friend, who had been diagnosed with severe depression. I had watched helplessly as he spiraled deeper into the abyss, his once vibrant spirit slowly fading away. It had taken every ounce of strength and love to pull him back from the brink, to show him that there was still hope, even in the darkest of times. Looking at Sarah, I saw a reflection of that pain. Her eyes were haunted, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her clothes disheveled and her hair matted. I could only imagine the weight of the burdens she carried, the events that had led her to this moment of desperation. "Sarah," I said softly, my voice filled with empathy, "I know we just met, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. I've been through some tough times myself, and I've seen the impact mental health struggles can have on the people I love. You don't have to face this alone." She looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears. I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "Everything just feels so hopeless. I can't see a way out." I nodded, understanding the depth of her pain. "I know it feels that way now, but there is always hope. Even in the darkest moments, there is a glimmer of light. We just have to keep holding on, one day at a time." Sarah looked away, her gaze distant. "I lost my job a few months ago," she said, her words coming out in a rush. "I couldn't pay my rent and my boyfriend left me. I feel like such a failure. I don't know how to keep going." My heart ached for her. I knew all too well the crushing weight of depression, the way it could rob you of your sense of self-worth and purpose. I reached out and placed a gentle hand on her arm, a simple gesture of support. "You are not a failure, Sarah," I said firmly. "You are a survivor. You've been through so much, and yet here you are, still fighting. That takes incredible strength and courage." She looked at me, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "I don't feel strong," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like I'm falling apart." "Strength isn't about never falling apart," I replied, my voice filled with conviction. "It's about picking yourself up piece by piece and keeping going. And you don't have to do it alone. There are people who care about you, who want to help. I know it might not feel like it right now, but you matter, Sarah. Your life matters." As we talked, I could see a glimmer of hope in her eyes, a small spark that refused to be extinguished. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but I was determined to walk beside her, to offer whatever support and encouragement I could. There was so much more to Sarah's story, so many layers of pain and struggle that had brought her to this moment. But for now, in the stillness of that foggy night, I knew that the most important thing was to show her that she was not alone, that there was still a reason to keep fighting. As Sarah and I continued to talk, the fog seemed to grow thicker, enveloping us in a world of our own. The distant sounds of the city faded away, leaving only the echo of our voices and the beating of our hearts. In that moment, it felt as though we were the only two people in existence, connected by a bond forged in the depths of our shared pain. I told Sarah about my own battles with depression, the days when getting out of bed seemed like an impossible feat. I spoke of the loneliness that had consumed me, the feeling of being disconnected from everyone and everything around me. As I shared my story, I could see a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a sense that she understood the weight of the burdens I had carried. "I know what it's like to feel like you're drowning," I said softly, my voice filled with emotion. "To feel like you're suffocating under the weight of your own thoughts and feelings. But I promise you, Sarah, there is a way through. There is always a way through." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a desperate longing. "I want to believe that," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I'm so tired of fighting. I'm so tired of feeling like I'm not enough." My heart ached for her, and I could feel my own emotions threatening to overwhelm me. I knew that I had to stay strong for her, to be the anchor she needed in this moment of crisis. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before I spoke again. "You are enough, Sarah," I said firmly, my eyes locked on hers. "You are more than enough. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you have so much to offer the world. You have a unique light inside of you, a light that no one else can replicate. The world needs that light, Sarah. It needs you." As I spoke, I could see the tears streaming down her face, the fog clinging to her skin like a second layer of pain. She looked so fragile, so broken, and yet there was a strength in her that refused to be extinguished. I knew that she had the power to overcome this, to rise from the ashes of her despair and build a new life for herself. But I also knew that the decision had to be hers. I couldn't make it for her, no matter how much I wanted to take away her pain. All I could do was be there for her, to offer my support and my love, and to remind her that she was not alone. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared of what comes next. I'm scared of facing the world without this pain. It's all I've known for so long. I nodded, understanding the depth of her fear. I know it's scary, I replied, my voice gentle, but you are so much stronger than you realize. You have already survived so much, and you will survive this too. And you won't be alone. There are people who care about you, who want to help you heal. I'm one of them. As I spoke, I could see a glimmer of hope in her eyes, a small spark that refused to be extinguished. It was a start, a tiny flicker of light in the darkness that surrounded us. I knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but I also knew that Sarah had the strength to walk it, and I would be there beside her, every step of the way. The sound of sirens pierced the foggy night, growing louder with each passing second. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, knowing that help was finally on the way. Sarah looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. They're here to help, I reassured her, my hand still resting gently on her arm. You're not alone in this, Sarah. We'll get through this together. As the paramedics and police officers approached, I could see the professionalism and compassion in their eyes. They moved with a sense of urgency, yet their demeanor was calm and reassuring. I knew that Sarah was in good hands, but a part of me hesitated, reluctant to leave her side. The bond we had formed in those brief moments on the bridge was a powerful one, forged in the depths of our shared pain and vulnerability. I didn't want to let go. Didn't want to break the connection that had brought us both a glimmer of hope in the darkness. But I knew that I had to trust the professionals to take over, to give Sarah the care and support she needed. As they gently coaxed her away from the edge, wrapping a warm blanket around her shoulders, I could see the fear in her eyes begin to subside, replaced by a tentative sense of relief. I watched as they led her to the waiting ambulance, my heart heavy with a mixture of emotions. I was grateful that she was safe, that she would receive the help she so desperately needed. But I also feared for her future, knowing that the road to recovery would be a long and difficult one. As the ambulance doors closed and the vehicle began to pull away, I felt a sense of emptiness wash over me. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the crisis began to fade, leaving me feeling drained and uncertain. But even in the midst of my own exhaustion, I knew that the encounter with Sarah had changed me in ways I couldn't yet fully comprehend. It had reminded me of the power of human connection, of the incredible strength and resilience that lies within each of us, even in our darkest moments.